Great. Well, it's great to be here. I thank the ministry for inviting me for this event. We hope we have a very interesting conversation that you'll find useful.
Well, first, to start off the session, I have heard that you have worked for Google for very early on. Could you perhaps look back, how Google has started and, how it has become one of the most important company in the world?
Sure. Well, Google, we just celebrated our 14th anniversary. So Google is only 14 years old. The two founders were students at Stanford University, as computer science students, graduate students. I was a lawyer at a big law firm in Silicon Valley and got a call from an old client of the firm who said there were these two students at at Stanford who had created a search engine in their dorm room, and they actually, as the real story goes, they had a check from this old client who wanted to invest in them, and it was a check for $100,000 for new computers and so forth, but it was made out to Google Inc., and there was no Google Inc., so they needed a lawyer to set up the company, and that was me. So that was 14 years ago. I joined the company about 10 years ago, or 10 and a half years ago. And I think none of us thought, perhaps the founders thought that Google would become what it's become, but the rest of us didn't. And I think it's a pretty good example of what can happen if you're willing to take some risks and have some very big, audacious, as we say, goals and a real desire to change the world. And that's really what's fueled Google throughout all the business success that we've had, which we're very happy about and very gratified by. But really what drives Google and what I think has made it a unique company is this sort of mission of the company to have a positive impact on the world using information.
I actually advise some Japanese startups, but if you say a big ambition to the investors in Japan, the investor would ask, are you dreaming? Are you daydreaming or something like that? And it's very hard to, be ambitious in Japan or, say big dream. But how is it possible in Silicon Valley? Is it in the culture to, help those, risk takers?
Yeah, I think it is partly in the culture. If you think about, why is it that Google was able to do what it did? I mean, it starts with having brilliant entrepreneurs and people who were starting a business. And Larry Page and Sergey Brin were clearly brilliant. They had a business savvy that was beyond their years. They were only in their mid-20s or so. But that smart people, very talented technical people, smart people generally, are all over the world. And Silicon Valley has no monopoly on that. But I think when you look at some of the other things that were present, they studied at a university that had a policy of commercializing inventions and technologies that were developed there. So the university took the position that one way to get good inventions out to the world was to allow students and faculty members to create enterprises and businesses out of them. So they had that advantage, and indeed Stanford licensed the technology to Google, and Google could go on and in exchange for stock in Google, so the university has done very well. And so that was, they had that to start with. There was no trouble getting the technology to build the company. They were also there with, in Silicon Valley, they had access to investors who are willing to take risks, investors who actually are looking for the biggest ideas, because the way their business works is they might invest in 10 companies and 7 of them will be miserable failures, right? 2 might be okay and work out okay, and then 1 they hope is like Google, will be a home run, right? And so they're actually, so that's part of the investing culture there in Silicon Valley. The other thing that was important was the sort of being around other like-minded, entrepreneurial-minded people. And what's not known very well about Google is that Larry and Sergey were part of a broader group of computer science students at Stanford, all of whom had their own little startups. And they worked on each other's startups, right, and helped each other. And just being able to have more minds applied to a problem is really, really important, it turns out. And in fact, if you look at Silicon Valley now and you look around the world, it's those startup ecosystems where you have lots of entrepreneurs sort of working together and talking a lot and working closely with each other. That's really what builds this going forward. So I think there were a lot of things there besides the brilliance of the founders that helped them along, that were cultural or at least institutional in Silicon Valley.
So the two founders are studied at Stanford, and you are also from Stanford? You also studied
Yes, I'm a lawyer by training and educated at Stanford at the law school, but I'm much older than them. So.
Yeah. But it doesn't mean, all the Googlers are Stanford graduates. You have very good mix of people as well?
Oh, absolutely. Of 30,000 plus employees all over the world. So we have not only a mix of people from different backgrounds in the U.S., but different backgrounds from all over the world. So we pride ourselves on having that diversity of talent. We have lots of computer scientists, lots of engineers, but we have a lot of people like me who are non-engineers who are good at one thing or another, and so we pride ourselves on that.
And Google as a company still has a very good relation with universities all around the world?
Yes, that's really important to us, is to maintain the ties to the university communities around the world. So we have many programs working in lots of different areas of research, of applied research, of one of the projects that we have is self-driving cars, autonomous cars, is something that we grew out of relationships with universities and some faculty and students at those universities who were the primary inventors and drivers of this technology. So that's an example.
I actually had an honor to interview one of your researchers or engineer who is working on the voice recognition, and he said he used to be a researcher at Stanford, but when he was doing research at Stanford, the voice recognition technology didn't advance much, but as soon as he got into Google, he has much bigger data, and it was so the progress of voice recognition technology has progressed so much, and I think how is technology helping
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I think one of the we're talking about big data or data and the use of data and the power of data here in this conference, and I think that it is things like voice recognition, things like translation. I mean, I don't know how many people here use Google's translation tools, but they've become incredibly powerful, and they've been tested many times against human translation, and we fare pretty well when we do that. And so you can imagine, actually, when you combine that with voice recognition, that's really good. You can have a device that, literally with no, my apologies to the translators here, but you could have a device that would automatically translate when you're talking to someone. But all the reason data is so important is the more these systems get to practice, right? By hearing, by indexing and including lots of data and performing the operations on lots and lots of data. That's artificial intelligence. It learns and gets better and better, and so that's why having more of the data to do that with is very important. So I think our voice recognition, our translation, many other things that rely on the fact that lots of people have done something before, that's really important.
Actually, last year when the big earthquake happened in Japan, gathering those massive amount of data was also helped many Japanese. Are you familiar with that situation?
Sure. Yeah, and we've spent a fair amount of time over the years with crisis response, and the earthquake here in Japan was an example of that. And it turns out that when you're able to access data, and governments have lots of this data at their disposal, whether it's location data, it's weather data, all these things, you can actually create services that are really, really useful in the event of natural disasters, for preparing for natural disasters to begin with, to respond in the immediate aftermath, and then to even build recovery, programs for recovery, and so data is very important.
A few months ago, there was a big conference in Sendai called Big Tent, and I was there to listen to, but some engineer in Philippines, or I forgot, somewhere in the Asia, he said, some government, the governmental organization, governmental organization is not very technically minded, to open up the data. Like they don't have APIs for the data they have, or sometimes, all their documents are in PDF format, so it's so hard to extract. But do you think that's changing? How is it in the United States? Is the data, that government holds is becoming more accessible? Or?
It's, in the United States, it's definitely becoming more accessible. I think more governments are understanding that there are efficiencies and to unleashing the data. Mm-hmm. You can deliver services to citizens easier, more effectively. It's been slow, mm-hmm. but I think the recognition is there. I don't think you find many people in government in the United States who say, well, that's a bad idea. Mm-hmm. But the question is, where's the money going to come from, and all of the normal questions. But I think we're making a lot of progress on that mm-hmm. front.
Milestone event or something that changed the attitude of the government? I think
it's been gradual. Mm-hmm. It's just a gradual understanding of why this is important, why this is a good thing to do.
Now this is not Google's service, but there's Foursquare check-in and Flickr sharing photos and all those things to share your data. And why are people doing that? And what is the benefit of sharing your own data to other people? And how is changing the shape of technology?
Well, I think the whole being social. I don't Sometimes we act as if some of these things are so revolutionary because they're done with the internet. Mm-hmm. If you think about your life pre-internet, your life was probably enriched mm-hmm. because you participated in institutions and organizations outside of your house, outside of your immediate family. You had friends, you belonged to associations, maybe you played sports, maybe whatever it was, but you always had this social graph, this this life that was enriched, and it was always it's the bargain, right? With I know we don't normally think of it this way, but the bargain is you share things with your friends, they share things with you. Everybody's life is better, mm-hmm. right? And so it was there was it was a breakthrough and incredibly smart for the folks who as we got into the internet age, people said, well, wait a minute, we can accelerate that and extend people's social graphs, mm-hmm. even perhaps make them richer, and do these things across, space, physical space, mm-hmm. In ways that we never have been able to do before because of the internet. The concept isn't new, mm-hmm. so the reasons people want to do it isn't new. But I think the ease in which we can do it now is, and so that's powerful, and you're seeing all the new applications where maybe things that weren't social mm-hmm. Are now social, right? Mm-hmm. And if you can find out very easily what people people you care about or people you respect, what they think about a particular idea, concept, or restaurant, or uh-huh. whatever it is, that's really helpful, and mm-hmm. we can do that at a scale mm-hmm. now that we couldn't do before.
If we talk about who is participating in that movement, are we only talking about specific ages, or is it spreading to younger generation and older generation as well?
Well, I think it's obviously the younger generation is adopting these things right off the bat, but I think it's I don't I'm pretty old and I use these things. And I think it's into the culture and into the society, and will continue. It's not going anywhere. So I don't think it's going to be limited to young people, although young people, I think, are going to be the ones who bring it to the rest of us.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's see. At the beginning of this session, we talked about how Silicon Valley helped many of those innovations to come, and right. many startups, but do you think the same can happen here in Japan?
I do. I think that, again, there's nothing magical, right, about Silicon Valley. I think it's an amazing and it happened somewhat by coincidence that all of these things happened in that place at the time that they did. But I think it's possible to replicate it. There are cultural things that I think that in some places need to change in order to make that happen. Risk-taking, I think, is incredibly important. We were talking earlier about whether actually Google could have happened in Japan at the time, right? And I think there's a question about whether it could have. Whether their entrepreneurs would have been able to. One of the things that when I first met Larry and Sergey, when you looked at us, it wasn't obvious that a search engine was legal, right? Because search engines just crawled other people's copyrighted content, copied other people's copyrighted content, and for its own purpose, right? And indeed, there were people whose sites we crawled, Google crawled sometimes, who would complain and said, "Why are you doing that?" So if you were an entrepreneur in Japan in 1997, and you walked in to see your lawyer, and your lawyer said, "It's not clear that that's legal at all. Would you have done it or not? Would the culture here have been, one that would have allowed you to do that? Would you have found investors who, in the risk, in the face of that challenge, would they have invested? YouTube is another example, right? It was unclear YouTube was legal, but yet YouTube was able to get funding. We bought YouTube knowing that there were some people who thought that some of what they did was a copyright violation. So this willingness to take risk is very, very important and needs to be part of the fabric of any kind of ecosystem that aspires to be like Silicon Valley. Now, with risk, with taking risk, obviously it means reward, right? If you're right and you do well, but it also means failure. And I'm sure many of you in the audience have heard this, that one of the distinguishing features about Silicon Valley is the tolerance of failure, and that it's okay for entrepreneurs to have failed, and indeed, in some cases, it's seen as a badge of experience, right? And so there's not a stigma attached to it if you tried once and it didn't work out. I think a lot of investors and a lot of us think that, well, that's a good sign because that person now knows what not to do. So I think that's those cultural things are very important. But the reason, notwithstanding all that, one of the reasons I'm excited about global entrepreneurship and that it can happen everywhere is that the internet has made it easier, right? And a lot of things have made it easier. So you can, cloud computing, all these services, Larry and Sergey, when they started Google, it was challenging for them to figure out how to get the processing power in order to build, their search engine. Now, ultimately, that led to, we have data centers everywhere, and we have a big infrastructure for that. But if you're a startup now, you can go use, services that are out there, right, and that are cheap enough for you to go ahead and have your own, kind of back-end system. That didn't exist before. So lots of services in the cloud that make it cheaper for you to operate a business online. I think although there's still gaps in funding, there are interesting new models of funding that are coming up, things like Kickstarter, if people are familiar with that, where you actually put a project up on the internet, and then through crowdsourcing, basically people look at it and say, hey, that's really great. I want to invest on that, over the internet. And of course, you have to change some laws in order for that to work. But we've already seen many great projects be funded by Kickstarter and other types of crowdsourced funding vehicles. Again, not something you could have done before the internet. And also, I think what the internet allows you to do is, from the beginning, target a global market. Right, so the default on the internet is you can go after a global market as long as you're smart enough about it, and not just the local market. So bigger markets, cheaper ways to get your service out. Those things make it, I think, easier.
Now, you said one of the strengths of Silicon Valley is tolerance to the failure. I'm not sure if you're comfortable sharing it with the audience, but can you share any failure that Google has made and how it has learned from that failure, and how Google has become better?
Yeah, no, I think we've failed on a number of fronts. There have been projects that we've tried. I can think of one. We thought we might try to do advertising in magazines and print take-our, because what we have is an advertising network, right? And the ads are generally shown on the web, right? On our website and other people's websites. But we thought, well, why can't we do that online? And we had a similar project that was, offline in magazines and so forth, in print. Another project where we thought we could do that on TV. Those didn't work out as well as we thought. So we dropped them. One of the things about trying to be successful, and I think one of the things we tried to do at Google, is to recognize when when something doesn't work out, and then pull the plug and move on. And so that's what we try to do is have enough small bets on things, especially if they have a big payoff, that it makes a lot of sense to put some money into something that you don't know exactly how it's going to work out. It has a fair amount of risk, but if you do it right, there'll be a very big return. And if you've only placed a small amount of resource on it, then if it doesn't work out, that's fine. It's not great, but it won't sink you. So that's kind of how we try to manage risk. And when we take that approach, we know that not everything's going to work out, and that's certainly been the case.
Thank you for sharing your failure with us. But well, perhaps we are running out of time. But one last question. I think you look very young, but since you insist you are old, I'm afraid. Maybe it's in Japanese DNA, to afraid of risk or not taking chances. And was Silicon Valley people in Silicon Valley, always a risk taker from the beginning, or is it in DNA, or? I
don't know if it's in DNA. I think there's a strain of entrepreneurialism that runs in American business and American culture. But I do think it was some, unique, when it became clear that you could build something out of, nothing very quickly, and there was a market for it. That could develop very quickly. I think just people saw that. There was, people who were entrepreneurially minded and driven saw that there was that infrastructure was developing, and it just became the way we do things, to the point where no one even thinks about it, right? That much. We just assume that you're going to take on things that, where literally the likelihood is it doesn't work. I was at a conference the other day, and someone was talking about, although American football is the most popular game, I think, in the U.S., baseball is still very, very popular. It's part of the American culture, and I know it's very popular here. But that's a game in which 7 times, if you fail 7 out of 10 times, you're very, very good, right? You're amongst the best players, right? So I think maybe that has something to do with why we're willing to take on risk.
Maybe I have a question. Time for one more question. Now, many people, is having this smartphone in their hands, and perhaps in Japan, more than 50% of people will have smartphone and these tablets. And when these digital devices will go into hands of many people, how is our future going to change, and how is Google going to help us into the bright future?
Well, I think it's devices are part of it, but I also think it's the information that that we have on the devices, the ability of the devices to connect you, to interpret the world around you, and then organize it in interesting ways that are good for you, right? And so one of the things about the cloud or the internet is what we're trying to do at Google is be kind of device agnostic, right? It shouldn't matter. You should be able to, whatever you do on your desktop computer, you can do on a tablet, something that's that size, or something that's this size, or maybe something that's on your wall. But you should be able to speak to it. It should be able to see you and recognize things. And so it's that those capabilities combined with being able to take information and combine it in interesting ways, so that, for example, at Google, we're not just responding to you when you type a query into the search box, but we are trying to understand what you like, what you don't like, what you tend to do, what are good opportunities for you, and so we actually suggest things to you, before you know you want them, right? Or because we think you might want them, and we recommend things, and all of these things with your permission, right? Based on the information you give us. But what we're working toward are these kinds of magic moments, where there's something that we can deliver to you that you're saying, wow, that's really exactly what I wanted. And I didn't even really know I wanted it yet, but that's exactly what I want. And that's what we're aspiring to. And I think with the advances in location, the advances in advertising and the way we can put information together, and also with voice and other kinds of technologies, all of this is coming pretty soon, and we're very excited about it.
I'm excited too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
ドラモンド様、林さん、ありがとうございました。